A home should be a place of safety. A place where you rest, where you dream, where you wake up to another day filled with the small, ordinary moments of life. But what happens when the very walls meant to protect you become the setting of your final moments? When the person you share a bed with, the person you trust above all others, is the one standing over you with a knife? Simueonette Mapes Crupi was a teacher. She spent her days shaping young minds, guiding her students with patience and kindness. She was known for her warmth, her dedication, her love for the life she had built. But in the summer of 2012, everything she knew, everything she believed in, came to an end. Her body was found inside the home she shared with her husband, Jonathan Crupi. A husband who should have been her protector, her partner, her safe place. But instead, the man she vowed to spend her life with was accused of taking it in a brutal, calculated act of violence. Stabbed 15 times. Left to die in a house that no longer held love, only betrayal. And when the truth began to surface, it revealed a hidden life, a marriage unraveling under the weight of secrets, lies, and deception. A man leading a life his wife never truly knew. A crime staged to look like something it wasn't. And a case that would haunt those who knew Simueonette, those who had trusted Jonathan, and an entire community shaken by what had happened behind closed doors. Tonight, we tell the story of a woman who gave everything to the world, and the man who took everything from her. A story of trust shattered, of justice fought for, and of a life that should have never been cut short. This is the case of Simueonette Mapes Crupi. At 9:17 a.m. on the morning of July 5th, a 911 call came in from a quiet neighborhood in Staten Island. The caller, Jonathan Crupi, sounded distressed, panicked. He told police that he had just walked into his home and found his wife, Simueonette Mapes Crupi, lying motionless in a pool of blood. First responders arrived within minutes. Officers pushed through the front door and were met with a sight no one could have prepared for. At the bottom of the staircase, on the cold hardwood floor, lay the body of 29-year-old Simueonette Mapes. Blood soaked the floorboards, the walls, her clothing. There were no signs of life. She had been stabbed. Not once. Not twice. But 15 times. 15 wounds. Each one deliberate. Each one meant to end her life. Police immediately took in their surroundings. Something was wrong. Something about the scene didn't make sense. The front door showed no signs of forced entry. The windows were intact. Nothing appeared to be stolen. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no shattered glass, no indication that Simueonette had fought off an intruder. And then there was the placement of her body. She wasn't found in the bedroom or near an exit, or even in the kitchen where she might have been preparing breakfast. She was at the base of the stairs, positioned in a way that seemed almost staged. It looked as though she had fallen, as if someone wanted it to seem like an accident. But the wounds told a different story. The blood patterns contradicted the idea of a sudden fall. And the sheer number of stab wounds, this was not an impulsive attack. This was rage. This was personal. Jonathan Crupi, still dressed in his work clothes, stood outside the house as police examined the scene. His hands trembled, his breathing uneven. He told officers that he had left early that morning for work, as he always did. He claimed he had no idea what had happened until he returned home. But there was a problem. Jonathan Crupi wasn't supposed to be at work that day. In fact, he hadn't been to work in a long time. 4 months he had been lying to his wife. Every morning he would get dressed, grab his bag, and leave as if heading to his job as a teacher. But instead of going to work, he would spend his days aimlessly driving, sleeping in his car, or visiting sex workers. He had been fired from his teaching position long ago, but he never told Simueonette. She still believed he was waking up every morning and going to work like any other responsible husband. Now, police had to ask themselves, if Jonathan had lied about his job for months, what else had he been lying about? The medical examiner's report only deepened the growing suspicions. Simueonette had been stabbed in the chest, back, and arms. Defensive wounds covered her hands, meaning she had fought for her life. The injuries weren't from a single frenzied attack, but from calculated, controlled movements. Whoever had done this wanted to make sure she didn't survive. As police reviewed the evidence, one question became unavoidable. If this had been a random home invasion, why had the killer inflicted such extreme violence? Why would a stranger risk spending so much time inside the house, leaving behind a brutal, bloody crime scene instead of simply escaping after taking valuables? The crime didn't look like the work of an unknown intruder. It looked like the work of someone who had something to gain from Simueonette's death. Someone who had reason to be angry. Someone who had a history of deception. And there was one person who fit that description perfectly. Her husband. As detectives pieced together their timeline, inconsistencies in Jonathan's story began to surface. He claimed he had discovered the crime scene only moments before calling 911. But his behavior in the days leading up to Simueonette's murder raised red flags. Security footage showed that Jonathan had visited a nearby convenience store the night before the murder. He purchased a can of soda and a pack of cigarettes. Nothing unusual. But his demeanor? Calm. Unbothered. Almost detached. Not the actions of a man about to lose his wife in a violent attack. More than that, investigators uncovered something even more damning. Jonathan had searched the internet for something chilling just days before his wife's murder. Topics related to staging a home invasion. Police later discovered that he had even discussed with a friend how easy it would be to make a murder look like a burglary gone wrong. But if Jonathan Crupi had planned this, if he had meticulously constructed an alibi, what had driven him to commit such a horrific act? The answer lay in the one thing he had tried to keep hidden for so long: his double life. By the time detectives began their investigation, one thing was already clear: this wasn't the work of a stranger. There was no forced entry, no valuables stolen, no real signs of a break-in. But what truly stood out was the brutality. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. This was personal. And so, the investigation began with the one person who should have been grieving the most: Jonathan Crupi. From the very beginning, something about Jonathan's behavior unsettled investigators. His story was inconsistent. His emotions felt off. He was tearful when officers arrived, but within hours, his demeanor changed. He seemed calm, detached, even oddly talkative. Detectives noticed that while Jonathan expressed shock, he never once asked who might have done this. He never asked about progress in the investigation. He never even asked to see his wife's body. And then there was his alibi. Jonathan had claimed he was at work when his wife was murdered. But when police checked with his employer, they discovered the truth: he hadn't been employed there for months. He had been fired long before the murder, and he had kept that secret from everyone, including his wife. So where had he really been that morning? Investigators began reconstructing Jonathan's movements on the day of the murder. Security cameras placed him at a convenience store the night before, purchasing a soda and cigarettes. Nothing unusual. But what was unusual was his behavior after Simueonette was killed. Instead of calling 911 immediately, he waited. Instead of showing signs of genuine grief, he seemed controlled. He made phone calls. He sent text messages. He even walked down the street to greet neighbors before dialing for help. The officers had seen this before. A well-practiced routine. A man attempting to set the scene. But there was one problem. Jonathan had underestimated just how closely detectives were watching him. Jonathan had claimed he left the house early that morning and was nowhere near the scene of the crime. But his cell phone told a different story. Phone records placed him near the house around the estimated time of Simueonette's death. Even more damning, his phone had been completely silent for a period of time, unusual for someone who was normally active on his device. It was as if he had deliberately turned it off or left it behind, creating a gap in his timeline. And then detectives found something else. Something chilling. In the days leading up to the murder, Jonathan had searched the internet for disturbing topics: how to stage a burglary, how long it takes for a body to go cold, and even forensic methods used to determine time of death. It was as if he had been studying, preparing, making sure he knew exactly how to cover his tracks. But there was one thing Jonathan hadn't accounted for: the science. The autopsy revealed critical details about the attack. Simueonette had been stabbed multiple times in the chest, back, and arms. But what stood out to forensic examiners was the pattern of the wounds. They were precise, controlled, deliberate. Not the work of a panicked intruder, but of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. More than that, there were no signs of forced entry. No struggle beyond the attack itself. Whoever had done this had been inside the house before. Comfortable. Unafraid of being caught. And then investigators made a discovery that would shift the case entirely. In the weeks leading up to the murder, Simueonette had confided in friends that something was wrong in her marriage. She had discovered Jonathan's lies about his job. She had confronted him. She had demanded answers. And she had warned those close to her that she was beginning to fear what he might do next. But by the time she realized the danger, it was too late. As detectives closed in, Jonathan Crupi began to unravel. He knew they had the evidence. He knew the walls were closing in. And so, he tried one last desperate move. He reached out to a friend with a chilling proposition. He asked if they would be willing to provide him with an alibi. To say he had been somewhere else when the murder happened. To help him escape what he now knew was inevitable. But the friend didn't lie for him. Instead, they went straight to the police. It was over. On July 11, 2012, just days after Simueonette's murder, Jonathan Crupi was arrested and charged with her killing. He didn't fight. He didn't protest. He was led away in handcuffs as cameras captured the moment, the world watching as the man who had spent years lying finally ran out of places to hide. But this case was far from over. Now, the fight for justice would move from the crime scene to the courtroom. After nearly 3 years of waiting, the trial of Jonathan Crupi began in June 2015. For 5 long weeks, the prosecution laid out its case against him, piece by piece, exposing a carefully constructed web of deception, rage, and premeditated murder. The prosecution argued that Jonathan had meticulously planned the killing of his wife, Simueonette Mapes Crupi. He was not a grieving husband caught in a tragic event. He was a desperate man, leading a double life, whose lies were about to be exposed. His motive? Control. Money. The fear of being abandoned. Assistant District Attorney Ann Thompson presented the jury with the hard facts. The phone records, the internet searches, the lies. The chilling realization that Jonathan had researched crime scenes, forensic evidence, and how to stage a burglary just days before his wife's murder. Then there was the brutality of the attack. 15 stab wounds. Defensive injuries on Simueonette's hands, proving that she had fought for her life. There was no sign of an intruder. No evidence of forced entry. No stolen valuables. The prosecution called on forensic experts who testified that the crime scene had been staged, that the placement of Simueonette's body and the supposed signs of a break-in didn't match the realities of an actual home invasion. Every angle pointed to one conclusion: this was an inside job. And then there was the most damning piece of all, Jonathan's alibi. Or rather, the lack of one. For months, he had pretended to go to work every day, lying to his wife, his friends, and even himself. But on the day of her murder, his story unraveled. He wasn't at work. He had nowhere to be. And his phone records placed him near the crime scene at the exact time of the attack. The prosecution painted a clear picture. Simueonette had discovered the truth about her husband. She confronted him. And in a moment of rage, he made a decision that would change everything. The defense, led by attorney John Michaels, faced an uphill battle. Their argument? That police had rushed to judgment. That investigators had tunnel vision and ignored other possible suspects. They pointed to the neighborhood, arguing that there had been a string of break-ins in the area. They questioned whether the police had truly explored all angles before settling on Jonathan as their primary suspect. But there was one major problem. The evidence simply didn't support their claims. The so-called string of break-ins never involved extreme violence. No other cases in the area had resulted in murder. And no forensic evidence connected any unknown intruder to the scene of the crime. The defense tried to poke holes in the prosecution's timeline, arguing that no one had seen Jonathan commit the crime. That there were no witnesses, no security footage, no direct proof placing the knife in his hands. But circumstantial evidence, when stacked high enough, becomes impossible to ignore. And the jury knew it. On July 30, 2015, after 5 weeks of testimony and hours of deliberation, the jury reached its decision. The courtroom fell silent as the foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. Jonathan Crupi, once a devoted husband and schoolteacher, now sat with his hands clasped, waiting for the words that would determine his fate. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the 2nd degree. Jonathan Crupi showed little emotion as the words echoed through the room. No outburst. No tears. Just a slow, shallow breath as reality set in. He had been convicted. The truth had caught up with him. Weeks later, during sentencing, Simueonette's family had their chance to speak. Her mother stood before the court, her voice shaking but firm. She spoke of her daughter's kindness, her dreams, her passion for teaching. She spoke of the future that had been stolen from her. And then she turned to the man responsible. "You took everything from us," she said. "And now you'll live with that for the rest of your life." Judge Robert Johnson did not hold back in his final ruling. He called the murder senseless, cruel, and cowardly. He stated that Jonathan Crupi had not only betrayed his wife, but had brutally ended her life in a selfish act of desperation. And then the sentence was handed down, 25 years to life in prison. With that, Jonathan was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, his fate sealed. He would spend the next 2 decades behind bars, haunted by the truth he could no longer escape. The trial was over. The sentence had been delivered. And yet, for those who knew and loved Simueonette Mapes Crupi, justice could never truly be served. Because no amount of prison time would bring her back. A dedicated teacher. A daughter. A sister. A friend. The void left behind was impossible to fill. Her family was left with questions that would never have answers. Had she sensed how much danger she was in? Had she known, in her final moments, that the man she once trusted was capable of this? For the community that once saw Jonathan and Simueonette as the perfect couple, the crime shattered their sense of safety. If a young, well-liked teacher could be taken in such a brutal way, inside her own home, what did that say about the world around them? After her death, Simueonette's fellow educators came together to honor her memory. They spoke of her love for teaching, her kindness, her unwavering belief in her students. A scholarship was established in her name, ensuring that her passion for education would live on, even if she couldn't. Her family remained outspoken, refusing to let her story fade. They made sure people remembered not just the way she died but the way she lived. Because that was the hardest part, the knowledge that she had been taken by someone who was supposed to love her. That she had trusted a man who had spent years lying to her. That in the end, the monster had been right beside her all along. Jonathan Crupi entered the prison system in 2015, beginning his sentence at a maximum security facility. Reports from inside suggested that he remained largely to himself, avoiding other inmates. His once clean-cut appearance faded. His demeanor, once confident and talkative, grew quiet. Perhaps the weight of what he had done had finally caught up with him. Or perhaps, behind those prison walls, he was simply forced to confront the one thing he could no longer escape: his own reflection. He had gone from a respected schoolteacher to a convicted murderer. A man who had built a life on lies, only to watch it collapse around him. And the years continued to pass. As of today, he remains behind bars with his first possibility for parole in 2040. If he is ever released, he will be a much older man, stepping into a world that has long since moved on without him. While the case seems straightforward, some people couldn't shake the feeling that something about it was still incomplete. Some wondered if Jonathan had truly acted alone. Could someone else have known about his plan? Helped him cover his tracks? If so, they never came forward, and no evidence ever suggested another suspect. Others speculated about Jonathan's true motive. Was it really just the fear of being caught in his lies? Or was there something even darker beneath the surface? But the most haunting question of all, the one that lingers to this day, is this: if Jonathan had never been caught in his lies, would Simueonette still be alive? Was her fate sealed the moment she discovered the truth? Or had she been living on borrowed time from the very beginning? The story of Simueonette Mapes Crupi is one of tragedy, betrayal, and loss. A young woman with her whole life ahead of her, taken not by a stranger, but by the very person who vowed to love and protect her. Her murder was not a random act of violence. It was calculated, personal. A crime born from lies, desperation, and the unraveling of a double life. Jonathan Crupi could have walked away. He could have faced his failures, accepted the consequences of his deceit, and allowed Simueonette to live. But instead he made a choice. A choice that ensured she would never see another birthday, never teach another class, never hug her family again. Cases like this force us to confront uncomfortable truths. That monsters do not always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes they sit across from us at the dinner table. Sometimes they say, "I love you," before turning out the lights. For many, the case of Simueonette Mapes Crupi serves as a reminder of the warning signs we sometimes ignore. The secrets we don't question. The red flags we explain away. But does knowing these things ever truly prepare us? Or do we tell ourselves that these tragedies only happen to other people, until the moment they don't? What do you think really happened in the final moments before Simueonette's death? Did she see it coming? Did she ever suspect the man she loved was capable of such violence? And what about Jonathan Crupi? Was his crime an impulsive act of rage, or had he been planning it for far longer than anyone realizes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Was justice truly served in this case? If you found this deep dive compelling, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more in-depth true crime stories. And as always, stay safe, stay aware, and take care of each other.